Hi, welcome back to week 3 of our mini course, and this week we'll be focusing on finding meaning in poetry. So let's go ahead and get started. So sometimes it's very difficult to determine the meaning of a poem. Something that can make it more difficult is the presence of figurative language, so language that gets a message across but in a non-literal or kind of veiled way. So understanding figurative language can help you understand the meaning of a poem. So that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to explore some different types of figurative language and how it can help you understand what the author is trying to say. So once again, figurative language is the use of non-literal words or phrases to get a point across. And some examples of figurative language are simile, metaphor, idiom, personification, and hyperbole. A simile is when you compare two different things using the words like or as. So for example, in the poem Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, she says, "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise." So you can see in the poem how she uses the simile comparing her rising from the ground to maybe dust rising after you walk across it. So that would be an example of simile. Remember that with a simile, you have to use the words like or as. Now, if you were to not use the words like or as, and you were just to directly say that one thing was another thing, even though it wasn't, that would be an example of a metaphor. So a metaphor is saying that one thing is another thing. So for example, in this poem by Emily Dickinson, she says that hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. So in this poem, what she's trying to say is that hope, she says that hope is like a little bird that is inside of your heart, and it keeps on hoping and singing despite the circumstances surrounding it. So that would be an example of a metaphor. Next we have personification. So this would be when you give human qualities to something that is not human. This poem by Robert Browning Hamilton gives a really great example of personification. He talks about pleasure or joy and sorrow or sadness, and he describes them as if they were two human women that he walked with at different periods of his life. So in the first stanza, he says, "I walked a mile with pleasure. She chatted all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she, but oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me." So you can see in this poem how he gives human qualities to things that are not human. Next we have idioms. So this would be another example of figurative language, and this is a cultural expression that means one thing literally, but another thing taken in context. So an example of this would be you're sitting inside on your couch and your mom walks in and she's soaking wet. She comes in, she puts her umbrella by the door, she hangs up her raincoat, and she says, "Man, it's raining cats and dogs out there." And of course, you know, cats and dogs aren't literally falling from the sky, but what she actually means is that it's raining very hard outside. So an idiom is just a cultural expression, and poets can use these in these poems to convey a shared experience. All right, so now we're just going to move on to hyperbole, and this is kind of similar to an idiom, but with a slight difference. A hyperbole is an exaggerated claim or statement that is not meant to be taken literally. So an example of this would be you are super hungry and you say to your mom or your dad, you say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse." So obviously, you're not actually going to consume an entire horse for dinner, but what you're trying to say is that you are very, very hungry. So it's kind of something that is said for dramatic effect to get your point across. An example of this in poetry is from the poem "The Tantrum Felt Round the World" by Kelly Roper, and it says, "When little Janie's mother told her, 'No more ice cream,' Janie's face turned red and her ears began to steam. Her body trembled harder than a huge earthquake, and when she opened up her mouth, let there be no mistake, she let out the most terrifying, awful, shrieking scream, the likes of which a million banshees only dare to dream." So you can see in this poem here, in the words that I highlighted, that Janie's ears obviously did not actually begin to steam, and she didn't actually begin to tremble harder than a huge earthquake. But this would be an example of a hyperbole, something that is said for dramatic effect. It's an exaggerated claim that is not meant to be taken literally. It's just used to get your point across in a big way. So after finishing this presentation and reviewing what we know about figurative language, I would just like you to go ahead and next to this video in the Google Classroom, there will be a link to a figurative language quizzes game, and you'll just click that link, and this is just a informal practice activity for you to apply what you have learned about figurative language. But before we do that, let me just go ahead and give you a heads up about our big assignment for this week. So for this week, we're going to be writing I am from poems, and these are inspired by the poem Where I'm From by George L. Leon. So these poems are great because they allow you to create your own metaphor. You're just going to use the template to write about important people, places, things, and experiences in your life. Basically how it works is it starts with the words I am from, and then using the template you fill it in with certain objects, memories, sayings, or people from your life, and it helps you write the poem. Since this is talking about so many important things from your life, I would encourage you to look back at your heart map that you created at the beginning of this course, and you can get ideas or you can add ideas to that to help you create your I am from poem. And of course, when you're finished, if you would just post your I am from poem on the Padlet, and you can also look at all your peers' poems when they are posted, and this will be a great activity for you guys to get to know each other a little bit more and see where all your peers are from and learn a little bit more about each other. All right, so good luck, and I look forward to reading all your poems.